Welcome to episode 4 of the Confessions of a Dealmaker podcast, how to sell your company faster and for a higher price. What do business owners need to know about selling their company?
Almost any company can become saleable. It starts with your why. What are your motivations? 10 businesses, 50, 100 businesses. What makes you stand out?
You need to think of your business with the end in mind. One day they will all have to exit their company either expectedly or unexpectedly.
Because ultimately, just because your business is profitable doesn't mean there's not more money on the table, more value on the table.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the Confessions of a Dealmaker podcast. I'm your host, Jason Godwin. I would like to also introduce my co-host today, Farrah Bass, the operations manager of the Exit Strategy Group. Welcome, Farrah.
Glad to be here.
Glad you're here too. I'm going to read a quote today on today's topic. I've not found one single mutual fund, one single real estate investment, any gold, silver, or anything else that has given me a higher return than investing in myself. That quote is from Patrick Bet-David. Patrick was the founder of the PHP Insurance Group. He is also the owner of Valuation, a entrepreneur-focused media company. He's a best-selling author, but he has also recently been the seller of a company and exited his company for well over $100 million. I wanted to share this quote because Patrick was an immigrant from Iran that showed up here with next to nothing in his family's pocket, all living in a apartment, one-bedroom apartment with him and his whole family in California, and was able to build a company that he could exit for well over $100 million. He made several mistakes, but he was able to learn from those mistakes and build something that would set his family up for decades. Mm-hmm. I bring this up because today's topic, I think, is one of the most crucial topics we're going to talk about on this podcast. So it's a lot of pressure on us to make sure we get this right. Mm-hmm. And the topic we're going to talk about today is, what do business owners need to know about selling their company? So the title of today's episode is The 11 Secrets Your Business Broker Won't Tell You About Selling Your Business. How to sell your company faster and for a higher price. So this content is lessons that we have learned in working with business owners who have successfully sold companies of high value, have sold those companies for over market value, and also from the lessons learned of companies that didn't sell or sellers that weren't in the position to sell when they needed to sell.
Right. So hopefully we'll cover a little bit about the forethought process and what to do to prep your company, and then what to do while your company is listed.
Exactly. So a spoiler alert, I am saving what I think is the most important details for last because it helps with retention, keeps you all around, keeps us interesting, but also because I believe there's a bit of chronological order here of the thought process and what needs to be covered.
Cool. I say we dive right in.
We're going to dive right into it. So the first subject we need to consider when thinking of selling a company is the why behind selling a company. A lot of times, business owners run into a situation where they need to sell and they haven't had the time or ability to think about selling and preparing to sell. So it becomes a function of something they need to accomplish because of an unexpected circumstance that arose, or retirement age snuck up on them, or a medical condition, or they need to move, relocate, family issues. For some reason, they have to exit the company, and they haven't had the ability to think about that at all.
Mm-hmm. So what are some ways a seller can think through that?
Well, the first thing to think about is, why would someone sell, right? So some of the reasons would be retirement, a change of lifestyle, health, family, or sometimes they've been doing the same thing for a long period of time. They're ready for a change. At least these are the reasons that we most commonly see. Mm-hmm. And so understanding why someone would sell or why you would need to sell a business puts it in perspective as you're doing your planning for the one day that's going to come, right? Because there's these two things that Benjamin Franklin says are certain in life, right? Death and taxes. This is one of my taglines I use though all the time is there's a third thing that business owners are never told about that's certain. And that is one day they will all have to exit their company either expectedly or unexpectedly. Mm-hmm. And it's your choice as a business owner. Do you think about that exit and do you plan for it so you can maximize it?
Right. And so how do you figure out what time is, if you know your why and you know the reason you're going to sell, how do you figure out the right time?
So the first thing is to begin with having a date in mind that you want to retire. If you plan to one day retire from the business you're in, or if you are feeling the pressure from the company you're in and you know that you're going to eventually need to change, you need to have that hard conversation with yourself and start making a plan, all right? And knowing, okay, I would rather exit when I want to, not when I need to. Mm-hmm. One of the things we talk about is the business bell curve, right? So picture a bell curve that goes up and then after it peaks, it goes back down. Mm-hmm. That represents the timeline of every company in history. Some companies are still in the climbing phase of that bell curve. They haven't peaked yet, and some have peaked it on the downtrend. So obviously, it's more optimal to sell when you're in an uptrend of business and growth. There's also some truths that the same person who founded a company won't be the person who takes it to the next level, right? So there's a time and place when the company has a transition where it outgrows the owner, outgrows the team that founded the company. So with that in mind, you have to start having the conversation with yourself. How do I plan to exit? What are the questions I need to ask myself? And also understand what are the wrong times to exit the company, right? So the wrong times would be when there's something that would prevent the company from selling, right? Something that would inhibit the value, inhibit the transaction to happen, to make a buyer not want to buy the company, or give you a negative strategic position, right? That could be you have supply chain issues that are now maybe making your bottom line margin hurt, unable to meet customer needs, or there's some big changes in the way you do your business now and you've lost a little bit of profit. You optimally don't want to have to sell during those times. But if you have to, it's still saleable. But if you can control your destiny, you want to plan to sell when it's best for you.
Mm-hmm. So you said a lot of times if it's not ideal, it still might be saleable. What might make a business unsaleable?
So this is something we often see in smaller to mid-sized companies, that an owner has had some habits or behaviors that have built the company in a way it becomes difficult to sell. Some of those would be making the owner the center of the business, right? A company with no employees is very difficult to sell because it's more of buying a job. Mm-hmm. And it's not qualified for E2 visa buyers who typically are purchasing in that smaller price range of $150,000 to $200,000. It doesn't meet that requirement of having 2 employees. And someone who's had enough success that they've saved up capital to buy a business, they're not necessarily interested in having a job. Mm. So that brings some challenges of making a business not saleable. Bad habits with financials. And this is something we'll talk about a little later in more detail, but if you're not showing a lot of cash in your business because it's somehow leaking from your business, there's not a lot of provable income. That makes it difficult. There's all kinds of other arrangements that we could talk about in more detail. Agreements with other companies that provide services that are not transferable. You can kind of back yourself in a corner with customer concentration. There's a lot of things that a business owner can do. And, for today's format, we don't have enough time to talk about them all, but you need to be mindful about there may be some possibilities of some situations that can make your company difficult to sell. You should probably find an expert to talk to and identify what those are.
Right. That's what I was going to ask, is how do you identify that? And it seems like you said an expert. I would say almost any company can become saleable. But like you said, it starts with your why. What are your motivations? And if you can use those as your motivations for fixing the obstacles that might come in the sale of your business, it's a whole lot easier when you use that motivation and remember your why of this is my end goal, as well as then bringing in experts and talking to people who might be able to identify those obstacles ahead of time.
Right. One of the things I always talk about when we're speaking to a business owner that's not ready to sell in the next year or two is you need to think of your business with the end in mind. And anyone who's starting a business or founding a company right now, you're in the growth phase. There's one thing that is certain: one day you will have to sell that company or exit that company. So our founder, Burt Risden, he has this saying: the only reason to start a business is to one day sell it. Mm-hmm. So you need to have that in mind when you're building that company, that you need to build it with the end in mind. The end goal is that one day you want to sell it. You want to be able to retire. You want to be able to pass your legacy on to the next owner and it outlive you.
Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that if you didn't begin with the end in mind, you can't now start. But it's easier when the earlier you begin that process and that thought process of thinking through what's my exit strategy, the easier it is to maximize your value.
Right. And one of the things we've seen true in our industry is if a owner at least has 2 years to plan to right the ship, you can still have a very successful exit. Mm-hmm. In most cases, business owners that are making profit, they're successful, the business is growing every year, they will have a very successful exit. But you can go above and beyond if you do these extra things, mm-hmm. right? Make these little changes, make these tweaks. So it's a great idea to start planning for this 3, 5, even 10 years before you plan to retire. If you're in your 40s and you know, hey, by my mid-50s or early 60s, I want to retire, it's a great time to have a conversation with the individuals and the professionals you need to start making that plan.
Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, just because your business is profitable or saleable or you're ready to exit doesn't mean there's not more money on the table, more value on the table. You could expedite the process. There are a lot of other factors that would make it valuable to think about this process ahead of time.
Right. You want to build a company that you can sell so that you know you'll maximize the value of what you're spending your time doing. If you're going to spend 10, 20, sometimes 30 years building a company, you don't want the exit to be the afterthought, right? Because there's only 4 ways you can exit a company. Mm-hmm. The first way is you can pass it down to a family member. Maybe a child takes it over. But one thing we often see is children who are raised in companies that either have the entrepreneurial spirit and they want to start their own thing, or they have seen their parents sacrifice and they're not necessarily on board for the same journey, mm-hmm. right? We've talked about it in depth in one of our other podcasts. We don't have to do it in depth here. The second option is you can shut it down, turn the lights off, walk away. The third option is you can liquidate everything because you have to get rid of everything at once. If you have mm-hmm. a lease, you have a location. But then with both those two situations, you abandon the customers and the employees, but you also don't set anything aside for retirement. So that leaves the only viable option as selling the operating company. So knowing that, you can now plan for the future and know that this has to be on your mind mm-hmm. when you're building your company.
Mm-hmm. Right. That makes sense. So if you are planning and you have an expert coming in, what does it look like when it's about time to sell? What does it look like? How do you identify the plan? It's the right time. It's, go time to execute.
One of the things, again, I'll quote Burt Risden. He says, the time to sell is when you're making more money than you ever thought you'd make, right? Because you want to sell when you're in upward trend of growth. Mm-hmm. You could still sell when you have flat revenue, even with downtrending revenue, right? We've had buyers that are more than willing to find a value add opportunity, and they're more than willing to take on that opportunity and invest in it and grow the company. But for your sake, to maximize the sale, you want to make sure you're selling in an upward trend, right? So you want to sell when you want to, not when you have to. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that many sellers make a mistake of, is they wait until they need to sell, an event happens, and then they have to make a sale, mm-hmm. right? So let's say a health issue pops up. They have no plan. They've never even considered selling. Mm-hmm. And now they have to do it under pressure. Mm-hmm. That makes it difficult to achieve their goals for mm-hmm. us and them. Mm-hmm. And we want to make sure that they're having the best experience possible, because they get to do this once, maybe twice if you're lucky, sell a company. So we have to get it right. Another issue we see is procrastination. Sometimes it's sellers and business owners are they're playing whack-a-mole every day with the problems that arise. Mm. So it's hard to make it a priority to execute on those tasks when you have other things that are, flashing red lights you have to take care of in your business: hiring issues, firing issues, customer issues, product issues, and how do you do it all, right? So that's a whole nother conversation for another day. But you have to make it a priority because it's going to sneak up on you if you don't. You need to make an exit plan. You need to sit down with a financial advisor, an accountant, attorney, and a business broker and talk about what is it going to take to sell this company and how much money do I need to retire on. You need to create financial targets to hit that exit. One of the challenges we run into is business owners tell us how much they want to sell their company for, not how much they think it's worth. And there's oftentimes a gap in those two figures, and we're not able to bridge that gap without having the financials to hit that gap. So it's good to know what target you need to hit to get to the financial goal you want to exit the company with. And with that in mind, it's a great idea to get a valuation of the company in its current state. Know how much it's worth now, and then know how much it needs to be worth when you go to exit. If you know that, okay, when I retire at, say, 60, 62, I want to be able to exit my company for $1.5 million. How much revenue do I need to have to do that? And what characteristics does my company need to have to meet that goal?
Right. So you have this date on the calendar, and you're building what does the exit plan look like?
So I don't want to go, that's a long conversation to go over the detailed portion of an exit plan, but in summary, it's knowing what your financial goals are and how much money you need for retirement. Or if you just plan to do something different, you're not going to fully retire, how much capital do you need to exit? Work with a financial planner for that. Work with an exit planner, a certified exit planner. We can recommend several. And know how much money you need to do what you want to do next. And then meet with a business broker, an accountant, attorney to determine what you need to do to the company to get to that goal.
Right. You've hit on a couple of times that there are things that are further than just increasing profits. Can you expand on that? What does that look like?
This is actually one of my favorite topics, the difference in building value and building profit in a company. Shameless plug, I actually have a blog series we wrote on this. I believe it's a 6-part blog series on the difference in building profit and building value in a company, because they're not always synonymous or mutually exclusive. So there's several things you can do in a company that would increase the profits but not increase the value, or would negatively affect the value. And it's good to know what those are so you can be prepared for them. So one of the major things we see is customer concentration issues. There's several service-based customers and clients we've seen that they build their business around a larger client of theirs that may make up 60 or 70% of their revenue, which is great for profits because it's lower administrative cost, it's lower operational cost to execute. You're probably working on larger projects. The downside is there's a lot of inherent risk with that client possibly leaving. So a buyer looks at that as, well, you have a lot of your eggs in one basket. So what happens if after you, Mr. Seller or Miss Seller, leave, that relationship leaves with you, and then that 60 to 70, 50, 30% of the revenue leaves too. So customer concentration can sneak up on you and will definitely increase the bottom line in most cases, but it will massively affect the value of your company. Another big item we see is the owner's role. So if the owner has a very active role in the company in management, in execution, and actually delivering products and services, we now have to replace that owner with the buyer after they exit. I always like to say the value of a company is derived by the size of the hole that the owner leaves when they exit. So if you're the end-all be-all in your company, everything must go in and through you, every decision, that's going to leave a very large hole, especially with technical knowledge. How much technical knowledge remains in the company after the owner exits? Is there a license qualifier that can qualify the business? Is there an operations manager that you can raise up to CEO? As an owner, you should always be grooming talent and looking for talent of people who can make you unemployed. I think as a business owner, your main job is to make yourself unemployed and try to raise people up around you so that you can go find new endeavors to pursue, whether that be business development, marketing, lead generation. Your greatest capacity as a leader in the company is as a visionary. You should not be the one executing all the tasks and servicing all the clients. It should be your goal to no longer do that. Grow your company in a way that you're lifting people up around you to do that and to serve those clients and living out their expressing themselves in their work through their expertise and passions. And by doing so, you're going to build a company that's going to far exceed the value of the competitors you're selling against. So it's good to take into consideration. Other things that are simple that can increase profits but then decrease value is having too many family members work in a company. Because if they're overpaid for the role they do, they may not transfer with the company once it sells because a new owner may not want to pay them those salaries. Or if they do not transfer with the company after it sells and they decide to leave, you have to now hire more roles or replace more roles, so there's more risk associated with that. There's other complications like multiple locations, multiple services not on the same vertical, trade and barter relationships. We start to see more of that now. Like, oh yeah, I provide this service for, this guy over here and he lets me, rent this facility for that in trade. That's not going to convey with the business. So you need to get those ironed out before you sell.
I think it's helpful in this situation when you're trying to determine if something increases profits but decreases value is to put yourself in a buyer's shoes. Or look at yourself like you're buying a different business. If the owner is involved and has these, relationships, these barter and trade relationships, would you buy that? It doesn't make any sense for you to buy that. So why would you expect someone else to buy your business like that? And I think it's helpful if you kind of put on a different lens. It's hard as a business owner to do that, but to put on a different lens and see it with an outside perspective. And if you can't do that on your own, have a business mentor, business partner, a close, someone who knows the business and can speak truth into that without bias and say, hey, no, I think this is probably not the most wise decision for your business if you plan to sell one day.
Absolutely. And that's a mistake we see often is sellers aren't putting themselves in the buyer's perspective and the buyer's shoes. So they're trying to, again, make a plan based on how they see the business, and then when they go to exit and the buyer doesn't see it their way, they just don't understand.
Right. It's hard. I mean, it's very hard to do.
Right.
But so we just talked about things that are maybe increase profits, or I would say even really in the sense that they decrease expenses, but decrease value as well. What are some things that might increase profits and increase value?
So these are simple but not easy. The first thing I would say is trying to replace the owner's role. Mm-hmm. That is the most important thing you can do in the company is have what we call a non-owner operator, or you can also say integrator, that's a common term, who can basically run the company in the owner's absence. That is probably the most profitable and value-driving decision you can make as a business owner. Building a solid team, building the foundation of your company and SOPs and procedures, having a really solid hiring plan, onboarding and training plan, basically structuring and building your company with a foundation that is documented and written, maybe if that's through technology, using project management, using places to store your SOPs, so that all of the knowledge and information in the company does not live in the heads of the team members, but lives in documents and in software, and in writing, so that, or video too. You use tools like Loom. We use that often to train and build SOPs. There's products like Tango you can use to record SOPs on screen capture and then make that into a PDF document and distribute it to your team. Those will give a buyer a sense of peace when buying a company because they know how much detail the owners put in the company. They know there's probably that detail extends to other areas.
Mm-hmm. And the way that increases profits too is efficiency. You're streamlining things. You're spending less time communicating, less time explaining things, less time training because you have a system. And me as the operations manager, I'm big on this. And so I see how if we have something that's done differently by every person, it's confusing for us. It's confusing for the clients. If someone were to come in and buy a team that is everybody's doing their own thing, I mean, that's just not attractive. But also the more we streamline the way we do things and have unity in that is incredibly helpful for our efficiency. And so we're spending less time on things, therefore spending more time on things that make money.
Exactly. We are kind of fortunate that we get to work with so many very successful companies. We get to steal what works and we get to make note of what doesn't and apply that to our own company. And I feel like we're able to get a lot accomplished with our team because we have these in place. We have recorded SOPs that live in documents. We have screen capture videos and PDFs that outline how to do processes. We use project management software so that we can assign tasks and there's clear communication. And doing all of these things will increase your profits, but also increase the likelihood a buyer want to buy your company. I mean, even things as simple as using QuickBooks for your financials and not using hand ledgers, which we still, in 2023, we had one this year. Someone brought in ledger books, so that's still happening.
Right. So those are a few things that would hopefully increase both profits and value. We skipped a category. What about the things that might not increase profits or might cost a little money to put in place, or are kind of irrelevant to the money bottom line, but help to increase the value in the long run?
So the first one, again, I'm going to keep banging this drum, is the owner's involvement, right? So the owner working less may affect the bottom line, but then it puts more responsibility on the team to perform and to excel, right? I've learned, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this. I've learned that sometimes I'm over managing in areas I don't need to. And if I just back off a little bit, everyone has the freedom to now express themselves and to step up to the plate. And people are sometimes ready to step up to the plate, but they're not because I'm being too overbearing or a leader's being too overbearing, right, or micromanaging. And so by allowing your team to start taking on some of your responsibilities as the owner, you're now building value. But in the interim, it may cost you money because you're not directly producing. But your goal as a business owner should be to work on the business and not in the business. You should be designing, delegating, deciding, and not doing. And the more you're doing, the more you're hurting your bottom line in the long run because you're affecting your value, but also you cannot scale because you're only one person. You only have 40, 50, 60 hours a week. And if you want to be able to spend time with your family, you want to be able to spend time with the things that are important to you, the people that are important to you, you cannot be the business. You will eventually not be able to work as hard. You eventually have something come up that prevents you from being able to work 50 hours a week. You eventually have something come up that prevents you from being able to execute in the same level you are right now. So you best, while you have the ability, start empowering your team to do that alongside of you so that one day they can do it without you.
And I think that kind of speaks to short-term sacrifice for long-term gain. You know, it might cost money to hire an admin, or it might cost money because you're not being the salesperson. And so you have to take time to train someone, or you have to not be the one calling, which means you're not closing as many deals, you know. But I think in the long run, like you said, you do then have time to focus on the things that are going to make the most money. And it's like, do you want to save money now? Or if your plan is to sell one day, do you want to make a lot of money then? So it's like, when are you going to make that money? And then how much? What is the scale of that money? If you only have the capacity to work 40 hours a week, and if you work more than that, it affects your family or your health or your business or whatever, it's either now you save a little bit of money or make a little more profit, or you maybe increase the value of your company by 50, 100, 200%, you know, depending on the situation.
You're 100% right. Some other things I have on the list, picking a niche, sometimes that could cost some expense up front if you're saying no to clients, but later on you pick it up in efficiency by having a more streamlined process, right? And sometimes we see buyers, especially in the strategic realm, they want to buy something in a niche. They don't want to buy something that's a generalist business because they may have a synergy they're trying to fulfill in their own business.
We do this one thing. We do it really, really well.
Right. Other things, trying to convert revenue from project-based to recurring. Little secret, recurring revenue businesses sell for more than project-based businesses. It's just a fact of life because there's less risk, right? You know, you have a relationship that's ongoing and revenue's coming in every month versus having to go out and close another project every month.
I'd argue, I mean, that ideally, you know, or at first glance, that might not be something that costs money, maybe. That's just kind of a different way to do business. But I'd say in the end, it usually makes more money, I think.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Because you have loyal customers and you have, you know, you don't have to, like you said, you're spending less time on sales.
Yeah. Another one that's kind of unseen, but ends up showing up during a sale a lot of time is tech and infrastructure. So if you have a tech backend, if you have a server, if you have software, having the most up-to-date technology and something readily available, like we sold a property management company recently, and one of the issues that popped up was they had a older software that not many people were using it anymore. So buyers were like, oh, what? We have to migrate all of these clients over to this new software. And it wasn't like a deal killer, but it was like a death by a thousand cuts, right? So if you can use the most modern technology, software, process, procedures, it may cost you in the front end, but in efficiency and salability, you're going to make the money on the back end.
Right. And I think, I'm a physical copy kind of girl. I like a physical calendar. You know me. I have my paper notebook still. But so don't fight the wave of technology. There's no way to fight it. It's going to help efficiency. It's going to look good to buyers. People want the nicest tech. You don't always even have to spend a lot of money on it. It can add up, obviously, if you have a lot of software costs, but there are a lot of free, you said Tango earlier, that's a free service for creating SOPs. There are a lot of free services, or at least you can try things out until you decide, okay, I'm ready to pull the trigger on this one.
Like Loom is $10 a month.
Yeah.
Monday.com, which we're an affiliate for, as well as Asana. I recommend both. It's just two different flavors of project management softwares, but you can build them into whatever you want. You could build them into CRMs. You could build them into databases. I mean, they're very flexible. We also, for CRMs, you need a CRM. It doesn't matter if you're a plumbing company, if you're a hair and makeup business, you're a health and wellness, you need a CRM because you want to make sure you can retarget those clients for marketing to grow your company. You also want your buyers to be able to have that data because they're going to want it. Shout out to Go High Level. We are an affiliate for Go High Level. We're a reseller for Go High Level, and we recommend it. It has helped us grow our business dramatically. It's a great tool. So for a CRM, that's our recommendation. Also, Monday.com has CRM capabilities as well. Great tools, can be very low cost, high ROI.
I think that's a whole nother episode of how to streamline operations or something there, because I see there's a whole nother conversation.
That's where I nerd out.
Yeah, I know.
I love a good software. I love a good automation, but that's a whole nother talk for another
automations
day.
Is a whole that needs to be its own episode.
Yes.
Okay. Well, so anyway, let's stay on topic. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about increasing profit versus value. You're still in the process of prepping your business to sell. Now you've made a plan. You've maybe made it a little more valuable. You have a timeline in mind. What do you do next?
So this goes back to what you said earlier. You have to see it from the buyer's perspective and what is going to make your business stand out to other buyers. So number one is revenue growth. People don't buy potential, they buy facts. So no one cares what you think your business will do in 3 years. No one cares. I'm going to repeat that one more time. No one cares. I had this conversation once a week. What about my Google reviews? Well, your Google reviews affect your revenue. What about my SEO? Your SEO affects your revenue. What about my marketing efforts? Or what about, this and that, the value of my assets? All of it contributes to the bottom line of your revenue, whether through reducing expenses or increasing profits. So that's what matters. It all comes into play there. So if you have brand new assets, that's great. Those assets probably have lower maintenance costs, so it affects your bottom line, increase your bottom line. So you can't increase the value of your business plus your assets unless it affects your bottom line revenue. That's where your growth is. If you're doing all these marketing initiatives and you have all this money invested in SEO, we had a guy one time, I have $200,000 invested in SEO. Doesn't matter. It's not producing revenue on the bottom line, so you can't now not get value from that and say, well, yeah, I'm ranking number one in this market for this. Well, it's not showing up in the bottom line, so it doesn't matter, right? So understanding revenue is going to be.
I want to interrupt you. Hold on. That sounds a little contradictory to our last point of profit versus value. So can you maybe explain that of how do you increase value? Like, what is the purpose of increasing value and increasing profit? Like, where's that line? If you're saying no one cares, we need to do the bottom line, where does value play into that?
So we're talking about when you're going to market, right? So this is when you're arriving on the market. Buyers are searching based on geography, deal size, and revenue and industry. Those 4 categories are what they're using to look for businesses. And the first filter they're going to look at is revenue. So let's say you want to sell your business for $10 million one day, right? The first thing they're going to look at is, before they even get to all of those value factors that you built in, they're going to look at the ratio of your net revenue to your asking price. So if you're trying to get a 10-to-1 multiple, it's not going to happen. Unless you're a software company and you have some unique widget that no one else has, or you're in medical, or you have some very strategic advantage that no one else has, 10-to-1's not going to happen, right? We look at all the deals coming out of Axial. We look at their reports. Those a very high multiple in this market is 6x, right? So the first thing they're going to look at is the multiple to the asking price. And so that's where you're going to stand out. Businesses that do over $500,000 in net revenue, so SDE or EBITDA, those will have a multiple increase over businesses that do not. That's kind of the break point where you start to get the attention of private equity buyers. You start to get the attention of institutional buyers, strategics. They're looking for businesses that make over $500K.
So I just want to make sure the audience is understanding this correctly. The revenue and the bottom line is the number one indicator that makes you stand out for the buyer's first glance.
Right. When they're first looking at your business.
Once they're like, ooh, that stands out to me, that EBITDA or that SDE looks good, that revenue looks good. They click, they get more information. Once they see the more information on the business, that's where the value plays in. Right. How are you going to, if this buyer is looking at 10 businesses, 50, 100 businesses, what makes you stand out at that point? That's what is beyond profit.
Right. Let me go down a rabbit trail real quick. For buyers who are not going to operate a business themselves as owner-operator, even some that do, a lot of times they have a virtual assistant, or they have team members within that fund that are searching for deals. All they do all day is they're emailing brokers like us. They're reading teasers that get emailed outbound. They're looking on LinkedIn. They're looking in places like Axial or any other deal aggregating sites, and they're bringing all of these deals that may have a 20% chance of fitting to their board or to the person who's the ultimate decision maker for buying that company. And the first thing they're going to look at is, does this meet our thresholds of what we can invest to, the limits of what we can invest in a company as far as the multiple net revenue? That's number one, the first filter they're going to look at. So to get you to the table, to have the conversation, that's why I say that's number one. Now, all of the things we talked about previously about building value will increase the revenue and will put you ahead.
Right.
Also, that falls into those competitive advantages, which when you advertise and the little blurb you can write about your company to advertise it, that's what's going to make them stop, pause, and start to notice that your company is way different than everything else on the market. If you have an operations manager, you have 2 tiers of management staff, you have the owner works less than 40 hours a week, that's a big indicator that the business is very strong. But the first thing they're going to look at is revenue. The second thing is going to be what makes this business stand out. They're going to look at competitive advantages. They're going to look at organization structure and how the company's organized. They're going to look at the team structure. They're going to look at those details that you share in the beginning stages of marketing before you release the confidential information to make a decision if they even want to sign an NDA. Because the buyers are hunting for a deal, and they may be looking at 50, 60 deals at one time. So they have to make a decision very rapidly on if they're going to pursue this or not.
Yeah. It's almost like your resume. Like if I'm applying for a job, the person interviewing might look at all of these applications and these resumes and say, no, just based on the one blurb or the one page resume that you provide. So that is kind of like your first in, is how do you make your business stand out in that first step that you take with a buyer. And then after that, you want them to want to know more. Right.
So in the process of marketing a business, you're marketing it confidentially, right? So no one knows who the business is. If you did it well, if you disagree with me, we have a whole podcast on this topic of the importance of confidentiality and why to use a business broker when selling a company. I suggest you go listen to that before you come debate me. But if you're marketing your business confidentially, they don't know who you are. So they may not be able to see all of those brand factors that make you stand out immediately. So how do you get them to stop and read and engage with your marketing of listing your company? Well, having consistent revenue growth, having recurring revenue is definitely a plus. If you have some type of contracts or subscriptions or mechanisms that allow people to pay you repetitively, that's great. The quality of earnings and how clean your financials are, that is another thing that makes your company stand out. What type of competitive advantage do you have? Why do your customers choose you first? What about your geography? What about your products and services? What stands out about your company? So we need to find a way to market that so that we can get the attention of buyers so that you're the first choice, right? One thing we've seen in our efforts that allow us to beat our competitors when it comes to selling companies is we're really good marketers. We're really good at getting engagement on listings. And we typically can get a higher price when we're selling a business because we can get the best buyers to engage. That's because we know how to ask the right questions. We know how to interview sellers. We know how to pull the information out of the story and then tell the story in a way that it compels a buyer to engage, right? That's so crucial to selling a business. You're telling a story because if I'm selling a building, I said this on a podcast earlier this week, right? I can hire a inspector to go look at it. I can hire an attorney to dig up title work. I can hire an environmental company to do a phase 1 or phase 2, all without ever leaving my desk. I can't do that with a business. It's something I cannot see, right? So we have to represent that in a way that engages the buyer. I can't just show a picture of the business online and say, yeah, this is a great, restaurant, come buy it, because we don't want anyone to know it's for sale. We want it to be confidential. So it's so important to come up with ways to make your business stand out from a buyer's perspective. When you're building your company, know what they're going to be looking for, right? And understand the importance of confidentiality and how difficult it is to market a business confidentially and make it stand out.
I remember when I first got hired and you were like just explaining the whole process of marketing confidentially and explain how, hey, you can't say it. If there's only one sub shop in town, you can't say it's the, sub shop in Main Street. You have to kind of almost play this like manipulative word game of trying to make it look attractive without giving it away. And I was like, how do you even do that? Like, I was mind blown that you have to play ninja skill. You have to play those ninja skills to even market a company properly and then also make it look good. It's not just getting it out there and not revealing the location or the name of it. It's making it sound attractive.
Right. One of the compliments we often get by our buyers is our marketing package of the best I've ever seen. And that brings me to point 6 of this. One of the secrets to selling your business fast and for a high value is hiring the right business broker. We're going to go through a whole series on this of how to hire business brokers. I'm going to just go over the high points so we can move on. I don't want to beat that drum too much, but you need to understand the role of a broker, confidentiality, creating momentum, and keeping the seller focused on running the business. Because if you stop focusing on running your business will stop working for you. You will stop growing in revenue, and the buyers will see that, and it will cause pause. But we'll go over all that in detail in that other podcast we're going to do on the topic. You need to know what to look for in a broker, right? You want to have a broker that has knowledge in your industry. They have expertise in your deal size. They've done deals in that deal size so that they can get it done. For example, if you have a pizza restaurant, you may not want someone who sells $5 million businesses to sell it because they may not have the right skills and the inverse of those two, right? So, like I've noticed within our team, there's businesses that I'm more skilled at and there's businesses I'm not skilled at, right? That Stephanie is way better at than me because she's the right person for that job. She has more knowledge in the industry. So knowing the track record and type of deal size and industry your broker works within, right? Understanding the process, understanding how they sell to make sure they're going to be the right fit for you. Make sure they're an IBA member, or if you're in Florida, a BBF member. Make sure they're a professional, not just someone who does this part-time as a hobby, because we do see that often. And that requires asking the right questions. It's great to ask for referrals from attorneys and accountants of who they recommend. Do searches online, mystery shop, brokers. Ask the broker for references. These are all important points in hiring a broker. We'll spend a lot more time on this in detail. So for now, we're going to move on and I want to see if you have anything to.
No, I think that's great. I think there, like you said, there's no point in being that drum. I think there is a whole topic there. I mean, mystery shopping them and figuring out if they're up to your standards is super important. But
Yep.
but I think we can move on. I mean, so working with a broker, let's say you don't work with a broker, or you want to make sure the broker does this, is the next point would be, while you're on market, while your business is for sale, it's really, really important that you're only working with the right buyers.
Right. A lot of times we see sellers get fatigued because they get under contract with someone who doesn't have the capacity to close. So understanding how to vet buyers and how to choose the right buyers, because you're in essence betting on the winning racing horse, right? It's you're going to lock yourself up for 90 to 120 days with somebody. You have to make sure that the marriage is going to work out. You have to make sure that they're going to take you to the closing table. Mm-hmm. And how do you do that? So you need to know their track record, right? Where did they come from? Where are they getting their source of funds? What is their motive to closing the deal? Are they a firm, a family office? Is it an owner-operator? Are they trying to get a visa? Are they a strategic buyer? These are all things to take in consideration because they all have a different requirement to close. Understanding if they're going to fund the deal through all cash, which I've only done 2 of those in my career. So one thing sellers should hear right now, if you're expecting a seller to ride in on a white horse and write you a multi-million-dollar check, and then you exit 2 weeks later, never to be seen again, that is a fantasy, ladies and gentlemen. Know that now. That doesn't happen. I've only seen it happen twice, and they were very small deals. So do not have that expectation.
Mm-hmm. And we're speaking to that in a few minutes.
Yeah. So understanding what motivates buyers, understanding how the buyer's going to be getting the deal done, right? Are they leveraging 401k funds? Are they expecting seller financing? How much seller financing? Are they going to expect an earnout? Are they going to be using an SBA loan? That's a whole nother topic we'll get into. Are they a search fund? So they have promised capital, but it's not their capital, right? That's important to know. So you have to have a process for how you're going to vet these buyers and understand the process. And speaking of the SBA, a lot of buyers we work with use the SBA. And so it's something that sellers need to be versed on to know what that process is. When I first started, a lot of the feedback I got from other brokers is, do not use the SBA. You'll get so frustrated. Your sellers will get frustrated. Deals never close. I decided to challenge that, as I am a contrarian and I don't like to go with just what people tell me. And I leaned heavily into the SBA when I first started. And I would say a large portion of our deals, in the beginning, it was almost 90%. It's less now. But most of our deals were SBA in the beginning. And so we have a great relationship with like 16 lenders. We have had great success, I would say, in the high 90s of close rates. We've only had a lender one time pull a term sheet on us for an unexpected reason. The second time was because of termites in the building, right? So 2 deals in all the deals we've done where the lender backed out at the last minute.
Mm-hmm. It's a great tool.
Right. And so it's important for sellers to understand how that can play into selling their business. Because one thing we've seen to be true is the SBA allows a larger pool of buyers to purchase your company because they can do so with less funds.
Expand.
So there's a loan called the SBA 7A, which is what's most common in business acquisitions. And I'm not able to go into a lot of detail. This is all for educational purposes, not advisory. I'll be very clear there. But the SBA allows buyers to purchase a company with as little as a 10% equity injection in the total project, the deal. So not just the business, but including closing costs or any legal fees or SBA guarantee fees. So somebody could buy $1 million business for $110,000, $15,000, $20,000 down and close that deal. And that business may produce $200,000, $300,000 a year in revenue. So you could get a return on your initial investment in as little as 90 days if the multiple is low enough on the business. So that's very attractive to a lot of buyers. There's some downsides for the buyers. They have to sign a personal guarantee. If you're in a homestead state like Florida, it means your house is protected, but you still have to sign a personal guarantee. Typically, you have to take life insurance out for the value of the loan. Sometimes you have to put your house up as collateral. So buyers who are willing to do this are highly motivated. Mm-hmm. It's not a flippant decision they make. They're making this decision with the purpose to close because they're willing to put their house on the line to make sure this business works. So working with motivated buyers is so important.
And I think to that is the reason that it matters to a seller or a business owner looking to sell is because it expands your pool of buyers exponentially. You are now able to market to a higher pool of people, and therefore increasing your likelihood of finding the right person. Right.
And I think this is again, almost every single one of these points of these 11 could be their own podcast. We're only on number 8 right now, and we're at 50 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got to do our best to give the highlights here so we can cover all this info. But I love feedback in the comments on what you want to hear more of. I'm going to finish a few things up on the SBA real quick and then move on to the next topic. So what's important for sellers to know? Quality of earnings in your financials is very important here because the SBA is going to vet your business based on how much cash they can see. There's add backs, which add backs are adjustments to the financials. They're expenses that are discretionary in nature that would not necessarily be an expense of the business operated under different circumstances. So example would be interest, right? Interest is an add back because you don't have to have a loan to run the business. You took a loan out and that could be added back to the bottom line. Owner's salary in some cases, depreciation in some cases. Those are just some examples. But when you start running your business in a way that you have very creative accounting and you have expenses running through the business that are not SBA qualified expenses, you may have a $200,000 owner benefit, but if we can only prove $120,000 of it, that's all the SBA is going to give you to use for your debt coverage calculations. Mm-hmm. And that's what's important to know is the loan has the cash flow in order for the bank to feel comfortable in being involved. And as long as you have that in mind 3 years before you exit, because that's what they're going to look at is 3 years of financials, then you can have a business that cash flows very well and sells for a high price because it's bank lendable.
Right. So what does that look like for a seller where it sounds like financials are a huge key in this whole puzzle, both for buyer proving to the buyer that you're making money, but also for lending. Can we talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this is number 9, the importance of your financials. This is often when we look at our sales funnel where our clients get stuck. We have a conversation with a seller and they're like, yep, I want to sell. You guys are great. Let's move forward. Let's do the valuation. And we give them the list of what we need. And all of a sudden it's crickets. And they go to their accountant and their accountant shrugs their shoulders and says, it's going to take me a while to produce this because you haven't been doing your financials like this. Typically you need 3 years of business tax returns, P&Ls, balance sheets, and then your most recent year-to-date P&L or trailing 12 months. That's what lenders are going to ask for. It's also what buyers are going to ask for. If you're not able to show the cash flow of your business using those tools, you're going to have a hard time selling it. That's not to say that it doesn't sell. We see gas stations sell all the time. We see liquor stores. We see restaurants. We see all kinds of local-based businesses sell for a high price that are cash-based businesses. But what typically happens is the seller has to take some risk on too, and there's typically some form of seller financing because you're not going to qualify for SBA financing, which means you're looking for a different type of buyer. So it's a longer process on the market. The deals will still close, but they're not going to get an offer in 90 days unless you're priced fairly and you're priced to sell. Especially in those upper ranges. If you're in a smaller business, let's say it's going to sell for $250,000 to $400,000, you're more likely to get an offer quicker. But when we get into the $600,000-$700,000 range of a business that's not financeable, it's probably going to take a year to sell.
Right, because you're not going to have a buyer come in and say, I don't see the numbers. I also can't get financing. I'm not going to write you a check. You said this earlier. I mean, it's just kind of common sense that if the numbers aren't there and there's no way to prove them, I mean, put yourself in the buyer's shoes. There's very little reason for them to trust you, where they have no reason to trust you. So you either have to A, find a different way to build that trust, or B, just get your financials in order. The less commingling possible, the more that you can prove on paper. Having an accountant, I can't stress this enough, having the right accountant get your financials in order for you, and it's not just you. I think that adds a little bit of validity to it.
To quote the great Denzel Washington, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. Mm-hmm. And that goes for business transactions as well. There's this saying that Herb Stewartson and Burt Risden, our president and vice president, say, sometimes the baby's just ugly, right? Sometimes the business is just financially ugly, and it is what it is, and we have to make do with it. We will sell it, but it's not optimal. We want to make sure we can avoid that at all costs. So it's very important for business owners to know that your financials are going to be very crucial in getting the business sold. The things that make it stand out will get the buyer to the table, but being able to correlate all the information you gave them will get them closed, right? Mm-hmm. So buyers don't pay for potential, they pay for performance. Mm-hmm. So it's not what your business will do in 2 years or what it can do, it's what it's doing now and what it's done in the past. That's what they're paying for. One of the things we get sometimes is, well, I have all these assets. How does that affect the price of my business? Again, the assets were used to generate the financial performance. So that's the measurement that buyers are looking at. The non-financial aspects, like we talked about, are equally important, right? Team structure, owner involvement. But when it comes to assets, it typically shows them financial performance, so the multiple applies to that as well. Same thing with marketing, SEO, reputation management. So, and like you said earlier, I want to highlight it's important to get the right accountant, because not every accountant is the right accountant. I always say not all attorneys and accountants are created equal, and that typically shows up when you're ready to sell your company.
Mm-hmm. And if you need one, we have a great network of really high-performing accountants that can help you out and get you ready to sell. And I think this just speaks to back what we were speaking to earlier, is if you are spending time gathering documents, if you're ready to sell for whatever reason, you might even be in a rush. If you are spending time gathering documents, you're not spending time on your business. And what we see a lot is a lot of the sellers that are ready fall out at this point, because what happened is they don't know how to gather the documents. They don't know where to gather them from. They don't know what they're looking for. And maybe they know they're kind of a hot mess because they're commingled with personal expenses. They're commingled with, the previous years aren't there. They filed like 10 tax return extensions. They haven't filed the taxes. The reality is that's just stressful. I mean, thinking about it right now, like when I speak about that, that's stressful for a business owner. And if you're worried about that and you're not worried about your business, you're not performing. So I think the whole point of that is having someone on your team who can help you to get that in order so that you can focus on what matters.
Professionals hire professionals.
Ooh, I like that.
Quick little story. A few years ago, it was during COVID. I took a friend of mine, we'll say, to look at a business he was gonna purchase. And the first red flag when we went to get into pre-due diligence, we had like a kind of a verbal LOI outline. The seller said, well, that seems acceptable. We wanted to do a little bit of underwriting before submitting the LOI. And first thing we find out is that the seller is doing all the bookkeeping. And then the seller also put together the tax return. So we then started to realize that the seller was working 60 hours a week, and they were doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and doing everything in the company. And the buyer's reaction was, I'm not buying a job. I don't want your job. I want to hire professionals to do this. But then we started looking at it, and the buyer noticed that, well, if we start hiring to replace all these roles, that's going to take 40, 60K out of the bottom line. And now this business is not as appealing as it was, because that took the cash flow down from $250,000 to $190,000, right? So it's important when you're building your company to hire professionals and to work with them along the way. So and this is a great time to move on to point 10. I would say this is the second most important thing or aspect of selling your business, is knowing what it's worth. A business is worth what a buyer is willing to pay. It's not worth what you want it to be worth.
I think you can leave it at that. No, just kidding.
I mean, it's that simple, though.
It is.
It's what's it worth? Well, it's worth what buyers want to pay. And
right.
What's that a measure of? Well, historic transactions combined with the individual factors of your business and financial performance, right? So you do a valuation based on not just financial performance, but what makes your business stand out and makes it more appealing. All the things we talked about earlier as far as adding value and profit, all the things about making your business stand out, all those will show up in the valuation because not all businesses use the same multiple. Some brokers may tell you otherwise, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I know buyers are willing to pay more for a business that has operational staff or maybe multiple tiers of management than just the owner being the manager. If the owner's working 20 hours a week, that business will bring a higher value than if the owner's working 60 hours a week. So I don't think you should use the same multiple for every business. That's why I don't think it's as simple when someone says, what's my business worth? Well, that's a long conversation we should have. But I think it's important for sellers to know that even if you're going to sell your company yourself, you should at least have a conversation with a broker to know what your business is currently worth and what it's most likely going to sell for and how long it's going to take. A qualified, licensed broker will have access to the data to know how many businesses in your category have sold, what the average revenues were, what the average net revenues were, what the multiple of gross revenue was, what the net revenue was, the average asset value, the average sales price to rent, the average gross sales to rent, and how many days on market. All of that they should be able to tell you. Because you need to know how desirable your business is, right? If you're in a category that has an average 357 days on market to sell, you need to have that expectation in mind. If you want your business to sell for $1 million and you see that the comps show that it's about 2.5x net revenue is what they sell for, well, you need to have, a very substantial business to meet that goal. But just throwing it on the market for what you think it's going to be worth is going to just waste your time and waste your broker's time and possibly risk exposing your business and risking confidentiality.
Right. And I want to add to that, it's not just about overpricing, it is about underpricing as well. I know you had, right as I was coming onto the team, you had a company that was significantly undervalued and you ended up selling it for like 3 times what they were expecting because they got some things in order and you were able to say, no, actually the market shows this and the history shows this and the data shows this. Let's try for something a little higher than what you were expecting.
I kind of want to do a podcast case study on that whole deal because there's some really interesting things that happen there that I think our listeners should know. The first thing was I was made aware of this deal through an attorney that we work with. And the attorney was hired, after the deal fell apart. And the attorney instantly found some things that were very suspect in the deal. And the first one was the broker was getting a kickback from the buyer for several $100,000 on this transaction. And the terms of the deal were very favorable to the seller, and the buyer and the seller had no idea. The seller thought, well, this is what it's worth. This is the deal I'm getting because this is what business is worth. The buyer was putting maybe 25% down. The rest was seller financing on real estate and on the business acquisition. And just everything was a mess. It was like they were going to sell for $1.5 million. They brought us in. We did a valuation on the company. Instantly, I knew that the financials were off, that there was something missing. The balance sheets weren't balancing. The P&L wasn't balancing. The tax returns, there was major problems. And so they had fired their whole team and brought in this attorney we worked with as a new attorney and a new accounting firm. And we all started working together and we found what the issues were. We ended up selling that company for almost $5 million 16 months later.
That's not a small difference.
No, 1.5 to almost $5 million. But the sellers trusted us. They were patient, and we walked through that process, and we exited the company. Or they exited the company for a far greater value than they initially were going to. They thought they were leaving money on the table because they were just very nice people, and they were taking the broker's word for it. And I'm grateful we had the opportunity to work with them and to help them get that win. But if they had not asked for a second opinion, there's no telling what would have happened, right? So it's so crucial to get a valuation on your company, understand what it's going to sell for, even if you're not ready to sell now. You want to sell in 5 years. know where you're at now, right? It doesn't hurt to have a conversation with a broker, because you want to start recruiting these people that are going to be on your team when you go to make the biggest decision of your business career, which is the exit. You need to have your team put together. You need to have an attorney, an accountant, a broker, and a financial advisor, so you put yourself in the best position possible.
And I would say too, ask questions, ask why the multiple is what it is, ask where they got that valuation from, so that you're not getting screwed over.
Right. And again, if you're nowhere close to us and you still would like some advice, please reach out. We would be glad to offer any advice we could to at least point you in the right direction, or refer you to a professional. Even if you can't work with us, you don't want to work with us, we're happy to steer you into the right direction, because we started this podcast to help business owners so they can avoid the mistakes that we've seen, and so that they can achieve a better exit of their company.
Right.
And with that, I think we come to our final, most important aspect, secret of selling your business. And I think it's setting your expectations. One of the challenges I often run into is that a seller hears a story from a friend of a friend that sold their company in a different industry, and it's like the story of when a man catches a fish. Every time he tells the story, the fish gets bigger and bigger. Well, a lot of times when people talk about business exits, the same thing happens. The story gets bigger and bigger, more outlandish. So this person has walked through life with that story in mind, because it's only probably one person they'll ever meet that have sold a company. And they now put that context across their business and say, my business must be worth this if his business is worth that, or her business is worth that. And so they have this expectation their business is worth far more than it is. And they come to sell. And a broker tells them that that's not possible or likely. What ends up happening is eventually they run into a broker who's so desperate for listing, they say, yeah, sure. And they throw it up on the market and nothing happens. And then the seller is frustrated because they have no activity. And the first step in this process is knowing what to expect, right? The reason why most businesses do not sell is because they're too overpriced. And they're overpriced because the seller's expectations are they want to sell the business for how much money they need, not what it's worth. Another reason they may sell too is a poor listing strategy. They just throw up a generic listing. The sellers may do it themselves, a basic write-up, because marketing's not what they do. And a buyer just looks right over it and says, well, I can tell the sellers, and this is another subject for a podcast, but I can tell when a seller's listing a business, not a broker, and they're not going to take the seller seriously because they know they're not professional because they didn't hire a broker. So knowing why businesses don't sell is important for your expectations. Another expectation is, how long is it going to take to sell my company? Well, for different industries, it's different. Different size companies is different. Sometimes larger revenue companies get attention faster than smaller revenue companies. But that's not always the case either. And it goes industry by industry, size by size, situation by situation. So meeting with a broker and understanding how long is it going to take to sell this company, so you have a realistic expectation. It may take a year or two. There's a deal I've been working on for 2.5 years. It just, because of the size of the deal, that's what it's going to take.
And I think we drew this on the whiteboard the other day. There's a scale that goes from your price expectations to your time expectations. We need to do a PDF of this or something. And so if your price expectations are all the way on the far side of the scale of, I need the highest, you have a price range of, here's the lowest multiple it might sell for. I mean, obviously less than that, someone will easily come in, but we want to hit your target range, the highest multiple to the lowest multiple. So let's say this price range is the highest multiple possible. I want to get 5x. And then the time is, hey, I have a health issue. I need to get out in the next 2 months. Well, the issue is, if you need to be out in the next 2 months, the likelihood of you getting your 5x multiple has decreased dramatically. And so you have to set your expectations. It helps to plan ahead of time and do all of these things that we've said, but then look at your scale. Where am I? Do I need to sell now, or can I hold this listing for 2 years, grow the business to meet my 5x multiple?
I started doing that when I meet with clients now in person. I go to the whiteboard if they're in here and I draw that, say, okay, here is the maximum price and here's the shortest time market. Where do you want to be?
Mm-hmm.
And they pause because they want both. I'm like, they're mutually exclusive, honestly.
Right.
You can't have both.
Right.
You have to make a choice. Where on this scale do you want to be? Do you want to be maximum price but most time on market, or do you want to be in the middle? Do you want to be down here at lowest price but shortest time on market? Because they are completely correlated and they move in parallel, and so we can't separate those two. Mm-hmm. I can turn over every rock. I can email every lead. I can post on LinkedIn. I can use our automated outreach tool on LinkedIn and reach out to every potential buyer in the state of Florida, 1,000 people. If you're overpriced, they're not going to come. Mm-hmm. So it's important to understand that, as you point out, the correlation between those two topics.
Right. And I think at that point, then how do you figure out what it's worth? And then I think it takes humility, which is, it doesn't matter if you're a business owner or not. Humility is hard for anyone, but it takes humility to understand the reality is it might just not be what you want. It might not be worth what you think it is.
Right. I actually have a project I started writing on that was the humility to sell. And that's another good point for us to address in this, is that if you want to sell your company, you have to have enough humility to believe that it can exist without you. Mm-hmm. If you think that your business will implode without you, mm-hmm. it'll never sell. Because you may be right, and you've built the business around you versus building a business around the business.
Mm-hmm. I can think of 2 times in the last maybe 8 to 10 months that we wrote the marketing materials for an absentee or owner or someone who just works minimally in the business. And then we run over the marketing materials with the owner and they're like, well, I sound lazy. I work from home, or I don't work at all. Or I'm like, no, that's quite the opposite. This is the testament to your leadership. I tell you this, if you're on vacation and the team is able to run, that's a testament to your leadership. If you're able to work from home or maybe take weeks off at a time, I think that's a testament to the company and the empire that you've built. And that's attractive to a buyer. It's doing the opposite. That means you put in the blood, sweat, and tears to get to that point. It's not painting you as lazy. And if it sounds like that, I mean, hopefully it doesn't. But I think that's where humility comes in, is knowing that it's okay to look like you've earned the right to take time off, you know?
Well, it's twofold. I can speak to this as being the owner of the company. There's times when I've not been able to be a part of something and I've had to step out of it, and I have to let the team handle it. Mm-hmm. And when the team succeeds without me, I have 2 choices. The first choice is to, if I'm insecure, I may be jealous because I was not as important that I had to be there. Mm-hmm. Or I can say, this team has become so successful that they do not need me to do the task. Mm-hmm. And that's a combination of hiring the right people for the right seats and then helping those people grow and helping them live out their passions in their work environment, right? And so as a business owner, you have to have the humility that one day you can sell. Otherwise, if you think that you're God's gift to everything business, that will show up in every buyer-seller meeting. It'll show up in every interaction with the buyer. Mm-hmm. It'll show up in the marketing. It'll show up in the revenue. It'll show up in the relationships with the team. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be very hard to replace you. And so you're going to have very few buyers who want to make that investment because they don't want to buy a job.
Mm-hmm. And then it goes into, as far as expectations go, understanding the reality of the complications of selling a business. You know, this isn't, not to say that residential real estate can't be complicated, but this is wildly complicated. It can take months. You know, even the due diligence process, there's a lot more to go through. There's a lot more knowledge and skill it takes to sell a business, to communicate properly, to market properly. And I think having those expectations and knowing exactly how complicated it can be is really important when you're getting ready to list.
So there's a lot of legalities to this industry. Yeah. If you step outside of your expertise and you make a mistake, let's say if you're a residential realtor, because every now and then we see residential realtors dabble in this because they have these relationships with these clients and they want to serve them. So they'll try to sell a restaurant, they'll try to sell a nail salon. If you make a mistake and it's your fault, you can get sued. Mm-hmm. your errors and omissions insurance may not cover it because you're operating outside of your capacity. If you're working a deal that's a multi-million-dollar deal and you make a mistake, you can get sued and you can end up having a very large judgment. I know of people it's happened to, not personally, but I've seen it happen. So knowing what it takes to sell a company, it's not the reason why there's only a handful of us in the country that do this is it's very difficult. There's a lot of liability involved. There's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of knowledge and technical skills required that I don't recommend sellers go down this road by themselves. Even if you just hire an M&A attorney, but you're still probably going to pay the same amount you would for hiring a broker. So that's at least what I've seen. If you're paying an attorney by the hour, you can pay a broker a performance-based commission.
Yeah, so. And I think that just goes to speaking to just protecting yourself.
Right. If you're lucky, you get to do this once. If you're fortunate, you can do it twice, sell a company. And you want to make sure you're maximizing the potential of the sale. And the reason why I wanted to put this together, and the reason why this episode's happening so early on in our history as a podcast, is I think this information is so crucial for sellers to have to prepare themselves for the inevitable transfer of their business that is going to come. Right now, you shared the detail earlier in the week with me about this is the largest generation of retirees. I think the baby boomers are exiting in mass. They're coming to retirement age and selling their companies. It's a huge transfer of wealth. I was reading something yesterday about Japan, that Japan is giving businesses away because there's no one that wants to take them over. So this is a great opportunity for buyers to maximize on buying a great company that they can now run for the rest of their working career and then pass on to their kids or sell themselves, build a legacy. And this is an amazing opportunity for sellers to take advantage of all of these buyers the opportunity of all these buyers who want to buy businesses, and you have lending available, you have opportunity, you have all the things, everything is aligned right now to have a great exit as a seller. So now is a great time to sell, and now is a great time to buy.
Absolutely. But you have to know how to do it.
Right. So I think this is a good spot to wrap it up.
I agree.
I want to thank all of our listeners for supporting us. We thank you for liking and subscribing, commenting, engaging on our social media. That helps push the algorithm, and that helps us advertise as a company, and that's how we're able to fund this endeavor, is through our efforts at Exit Strategy Group, helping buyers and sellers purchase companies and have exits and perform mergers and acquisitions. So I'm very excited that we were able to do this and share this information today. Farrah, is there anything else you want to add?
No, just please comment. Tell us what you liked, what's worked for you. Share what you want to hear, what episodes you want us to cover in the future.
Yes, if you have any questions, please add them to the comments, because I want to build enough questions that we can have a Q&A episode in itself.
That would be awesome.
Farrah, I thank you for being on this episode today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, awesome. Thank you all for listening.